And welcome back to another edition of DocWork. My name is Roehl Sybing. I'm a research associate at the University of North Dakota, and today I'm going through our ethnography model that we generated through AI in the last video. Today's topic is going to be about our ethnographer positionality and the field notes that we take when we are doing observations. What does the data look like when we go into the field? How do we record it? And what is it about our positionality that influences what we see and what we record while we're in the field? So, for those of you who are new to ethnography, it's basically going out into the world and trying to understand its culture. You take notes, you interview people, you try to capture what people think, what they do. When you participate in that culture, what do you do in there? How do you feel about it? Do you feel like you're an insider, like you're an outsider? Do you feel comfortable in that position? And a lot of that ethnographic process comes down to positionality. It's basically, in a nutshell, who you are in context with the rest of the culture that you're positioned in and doing fieldwork in. So, positionality, if you read a number of ethnographic studies in peer-reviewed journals, you'll find oftentimes a positionality statement inside the methods section. It's usually a paragraph, it could be 3 paragraphs, it could be interwoven throughout the paper. But a simple, quick and dirty positionality statement almost feels like a bio sketch. The ethnographer studied at this university, was born in this country, and has experience in doing this, this, and this. And such positionality statements are meant to give the reader an understanding of where the ethnographer is coming from so that they can understand the data analysis and the findings of that analysis. They don't necessarily have to agree with everything that the author believes, but they do need to get a sense of how that ethnographer comes to think about and view the world. And such we have a positionality statement in many ethnographic research papers. And to be honest, I probably don't trust or find less credible ethnographic papers that don't have some sort of positionality statement interwoven into the paper, because I don't know where the researcher is coming from or how they make sense of the world without such descriptions. So one of the things that is emphasized in ethnographic research for newer researchers in PhD programs is to take copious notes in order to understand their own process and to be able to share that process with the rest of the world when it's time to write the report. So, one of the first memos that ethnographers will write about themselves before they go into the field is to write about their own profile. And that profile could be some simple things such as age, where they are studying, what they are studying, what their research interests are, and maybe potential biases that they might see for themselves. Very difficult for people to acknowledge their own biases, especially first time when they're doing an ethnography. But which is why the more notes that you create about yourself, the more that you can identify your own biases later on. And so we have the AI present an ethnography profile that can form the positionality. Some of these aspects are simple, like here's Casey Miller. She's 26 years old. She's a second-year PhD student in sociology at a large urban university. All of these things are necessary, but they are not the most important things in our positionality most times. Definitely the research focus will help because when depending on my research focus, I might look at a culture in a different way. This person might be focused on interaction in public and semi-public spaces, which is why their framework is going to be on third places. Not at home, not at work, but places where people of different backgrounds gather in a public space and are free to inhabit that space and to mingle with other people in that space. If I am an education major, then I might have a different research focus. I might look at how managers train baristas or how managers train the cashiers about how to interact with customers. Maybe I look at how the baristas go around and hand out samples and teach the customers what they're handing out as free samples. So I might be looking at things differently than Casey Miller. Or if I am just a plain old coffee aficionado, maybe I'm just focused on the coffee, and I'm not focused on the other interactions that are going around in the cafe. So it's really important to nail down what the research focus is so that it can guide the data collection and data analysis. Other things such as background, people can get very detailed in positionality. It's not just where we go to school or what research interests we're focused on. It could be something as small as I'm a video game aficionado. I grew up in a mid-sized suburban U.S. town. I have worked in a little bit in major coffee chains. So it could be not just the professional identities that inform our research, but it could be our other professional backgrounds and even our personal identities. So, and we'll get into more of that in this channel. Now, one thing I want to focus on is towards the second half of this ethnographer profile. We have the ethnographic style over here. One thing to keep in mind as we look at the field notes, kind of a spoiler alert, is that Casey Miller often writes reflective notes about how at home versus out of place she feels in particular sites. This is a topic that we explore a lot in ethnographic research, the emic versus edict distinctions. How you behave as an insider is going to be different than how you behave as an outsider. If you are a lifelong baseball fan and you go to a soccer game, you might feel out of place and maybe a little bit disoriented about what's going on, what to do when you're participating in a soccer game, even as a bystander. Or you might be an insider and you know everything about that, about the particulars of what goes on at a soccer game, what the fans do, what the players and staff and coaches are doing, what's going on in the concession stands, what do you need to do if you want to buy a souvenir. So, how you feel within a particular context has a profound impact of what is being collected in terms of data while you're in the field. So keep this bullet point in mind as we look at the field notes. Some other things that might be, this last bullet point jumps out. Conscious of her assumption that independent cafes are more authentic social spaces. Sometimes she is working to problematize in her analysis. So you'll find a lot of cafe aficionados who abhor the major chains of the world as cold and corporate. Whereas if you go to an independent coffee shop and it's more cozy, it's more comfortable. But is that because of the actual environment and the people in it, or is it because of our biases? Do we like do we find that coffee shops that are independent more comfortable because we are biased towards them? Or do we hate going to a coffee chain because that's what we've been conditioned to do all this time? The answer is never black and white, but it's really important to identify where our biases might be so that when we look back at our field notes and our data, we think, yeah, maybe I maybe I let my biases work too much into the data. We have one more bullet point in the access and role presentation. Her background may bias her to interpret independent cafes through a community creative lens and chain shops through a corporate impersonal lens. Think about that for yourself as you go into the field. And if you are familiar with a particular culture, What are the biases that might influence the way that you capture particular events and particular interactions during observation? So now let's talk about the data that you actually collect in the field. And in most cases, it's going to be ethnographic field notes. It could be in a notebook, it could be on your laptop, but whatever it is, it has to comprehensively, as best as possible, document what you observe while you are in the context that you are observing. Take a look at this set of field notes. Everyone has a particular way of documenting what they see while they're doing observations. And there's no one right way of doing it. Probably the best advice is write in the way that is most comfortable to you. For me, I would do a chronological order of events with keywords. I wouldn't be able to write sentences. I prefer to write on paper, but I'm not fast enough to capture everything all at once, so I try to shorten my sentences. I try to use shorthand as best as possible. This Casey Miller appears to use more extended narrative. We're not talking about an essay, but full sentences, and that might be better to more ably capture detail. When you write in shorthand, you might miss some of the finer details as you are uh, collecting data and then reflecting on the data later. So let's go around and look at these field notes. This is the first one at a major chain coffee shop in a downtown area. So here we have Casey Miller talking about the physical layout and atmosphere. One of the principles in ethnographic research is something called thick description. And Clifford Geertz talks a lot about thick description. It's a very dense and, in my opinion, largely inaccessible text, but the main principle is to describe as much as possible, as thoroughly as possible, so that when you write up your ethnographic report, somebody who's reading that report can kind of immerse themselves in the context to feel that they're living the context as much as you did when you were doing your observations. So it could be small things such as physical layout and atmosphere. It could be the bright lighting, the pop music playing quietly, even the smallest detail, things that interest you, things that grab your attention, things that bother you. Anything from the smell of coffee to the sound of the music to the noise outside. All of that sense data is really important when you are capturing ethnographic data and reporting it later in a way that allows your research audience to put themselves in your shoes. So try to keep as much detail as possible. You won't be able to capture all of it. Try to document as much information as possible in your field notes. Things such as arrival or first impressions, things that happen when you document at a specific time. It could be the number of people because that matters, right? When you're in line during rush hour, if it's a line of 2 people, it feels differently than when there's a line of 10 people. I remember standing in front of a food truck yesterday with a long line and was waiting 30 minutes when there's so much to do around me and I don't want to wait that long. And so the number of people in that line really matter. Seating is about half occupied, also important, especially in the morning when you want to sit in the coffee shop and do your work. You don't want to be waiting around for a table. Customers are mostly in business attire. That's an interesting note, as opposed to I don't know, a college coffee shop that's full of students who are relaxed, listening to music, talking with friends. The demeanor, the tenor of the place definitely matters with all of these little details. The customer staff interaction, it's broken down into small little moments. You don't have to capture every little thing. Try to capture the things that matter to your research interest. And it's hard to make that judgment in the moment, but it's a really important skill as you get more practice in ethnographic research. So maybe this is a good time to go back to our ethnographer profile and review the research focus. interaction in public and semi-public spaces, particular attention to how space is structured and how people negotiate norms of interaction in third places. So here we have the customer and staff interaction. So here's Maria with this, who is the staff member, who is talking with a man in a suit about the bakery items in the counter. Tries to give some short answers. These interactions between customers, you notice the time, 5 minutes apart, because things have got to happen very quickly. For me, if I'm thinking about a college coffee shop, the pace is a whole lot slower. That's not a bad thing, but you'll notice that the barista or the cashier takes their time when they are talking with customers, doesn't feel a need as often to rush things along. So that's one thing that we notice. And I think that will go to Casey Miller's bias for independent coffee shops. Uh, that the wording that Maria gives concise answer, both smile but move on quickly. Would an ethnographer who isn't as interested in independent coffee shops and isn't as biased towards them word this interaction in the same way? And I think if you're someone like me who is from New York, who is from big cities, who is used to busy cafes, that this is probably normal. And because it's normal, I might overlook it um, because of my own biases. This is a concept in research called the familiarity problem. When you are too familiar or deeply familiar with a particular concept or context, you might take its things for granted, whereas other people, through different positionalities, might pay more attention to it because it is unfamiliar to them. So keep that in mind as you review your own field notes, that what you see as common sense or as taken for granted may not be so for other ethnographers, and that is not a bad thing. It's really important to see how different people see the world differently. And then we have other notes on customer to customer react interaction. What is the mood? Some things can't be documented chronologically. Just as with the physical layout and atmosphere, we get a sense of what the mood is over time. And that's one of the weaknesses that I have as an ethnographer. If I strictly record a chronological list of events without capturing the things that are timeless within the context, what kind of mood is happening within the coffee shop? How are the types of customers coming and going? You won't be able to document and answer those questions if you create field notes strictly on discrete events. So, in any case, all of this demonstrates the differences in styles that ethnographers will have, and there's no one right way to do it as long as you're able to capture rich data and deeply analyze the data later on. One thing to look at is the reflexive notes. It's one thing to capture notes in the moment, but the feeling of the context will differ 5 minutes after you leave it, or 30 minutes after you leave it, or the day after you leave it. You might think about something differently than when you were observing it in that moment. So it's really important to practice reflexivity uh, in terms of positionality and in terms of bettering yourself as a researcher in terms of your methodology. So things such as notice feeling somewhat out of place as someone staying longer than most customers, because a whole lot of customers in this context come in, come out. They're there to get coffee or food in between work, in between play. They may not be there to stay as long as Casey Miller did. And maybe that might make her more or less comfortable. And that's really important to document. I know that if I go to a party and I know everybody there, I'm more comfortable with talking with the people around me and having a good time. If I don't know anyone or at this party, or if I'm unfamiliar with the area, maybe my feelings are different. Maybe I'm not comfortable. Maybe I'm more in my shell. And as a result, maybe I'm not capturing the rich data, if I were an ethnographer, than I would if I was more comfortable in a new place. Or maybe if I'm in a new place, maybe I don't know what to document. There might be some happening around me that is new and unfamiliar, but I don't know how to put it into words. And that's really important to document in our reflexive notes. The reflexive notes don't have to be its own section. It could be, you could be taking notes around your notes. The style will differ from ethnographer to ethnographer. And you'll find, I have a hunch, we'll find that Casey Miller is more comfortable in the more independent setting because it doesn't feel as corporate or cold and more creative as a result. Physical layout, small but bright space. Already we're off to a good start. Baristas behind a marble countertop, visible espresso machines, chalkboard menu, highlight specialty beans, community notices, background music, indie folk played softly. And so this is something that we want to consider as we are talking about our bias towards a particular context that aligns more with what we want to do. That we we tend to play up the things that we like about a place that we like, and at the opposite, we tend to play up the things that we don't like about the things about a context that we don't like. That sounds common sense, but it does have a profound effect on the way that we collect data. So it's again, the positionality, when we look back at it, is going to really make us think, oh, yeah, that's why I wrote the notes the way that I did. And maybe I should expand my lens. Maybe I should narrow my lens. Maybe I should think about other things as I conduct other observations over the course of the study. You do want to be reflexive throughout the course of the study. How you take notes in the last observation should be more refined than how you take notes in your first observation. We are used to experimental research where we try to match the same conditions in every particular observation, in every particular experiment. And that's not the case in social science research, especially when you are trying to engage in the social world and trying to be a better researcher. We don't have the perfect tools of observation the moment we enter the field. And so we think about and reflect on how we become better researchers by looking back at our field notes and saying, how can I do better? And that doesn't mean throwing away field note one. There are some rich insights that we can get from the first observation that will help us when we are analyzing both field notes together. In any case, the format appears to be similar. There are some things about the customer staff interactions, uh, first impressions where customers greet baristas by name. That sounds like a good thing. The mood and the regulars, the space is relaxed, energetic, feels open. Think about the vocabulary that you use as you document your observations, that you might use more positive words. Relaxed, energetic, feels open. Field note one, let's see. Steady turnover of customers, little evidence of regulars besides a man greeted with good to see you again. Mood is efficient, neutral, and slightly impersonal. Not necessarily negative words, but definitely not the glowing advertisement that you see in this over here with relaxed, energetic, and feels open. And then the reflections. The researcher feels very at home, realizes space fits her preferred lifestyle. And as a result, maybe they naturally feel good in this second space than they would in the first space. Not that this is necessarily fatal to the data analysis, but it's really important to keep that in mind and to document that when sharing your ethnographic insights with your larger research audience. because ethnography is a lot about the culture that we observe, but it's also about how we as individuals view it. There's a whole other discussion we can have about, is this rigorous research? Short answer is yes, but not in the way that clinical researchers who want to bracket everything and to mitigate all bias have in mind. And there's a whole argument about it. We'll probably get into it in a separate video, but at this point, we can see how the ethnographer's positionality really influences the field notes, and at the same time, hopefully this gives you an idea of how field notes can be recorded. You don't have to conform to this format, but maybe if you're new to ethnography, use this as a template so that maybe you can innovate on your own practices and think about what makes the most sense in terms of gathering the richest field notes in the most efficient way that makes you most comfortable with the data that you're collecting. So all of these things that I'm open to discussing, we'll definitely go back to the ethnographer profile as we get into the interview transcripts, and then we'll incorporate some other forms of data. I'm hoping we can get into document collection, which is another important component of ethnographic research. So give me a sense of how you think about ethnography so far. How comfortable are you with presenting your own positionality? How well do you know your own positionality? When you look at your field notes, or when it comes time to documenting your field notes, what makes sense to you? Do you write in full sentences? Do you use keywords like I do? Do you Are you more comfortable with a laptop, or are you okay with writing in a notebook and then scanning it in later? What is that style that makes you comfortable? Probably always good to, even if you're not doing a full study, to go out into the field, pick a random place, a coffee shop, a public park, a shopping mall, whatever that is where people are around. I always tell my students, spend 1 hour doing nothing, but take a notebook or take a laptop and just quietly take notes. Think about what's going on, what do you see, what do you sense, and look at those field notes later and say, did I capture this environment as best as possible? And what could I do to do better in my next observation? So, in any case, this is a good place to stop where we are, and we'll get into interviews in terms of positionality and in terms of what we see in the field notes in our next video. So, leave a comment about how you feel about ethnography and what you think could be improved upon in these field notes. Keep in mind that all of the data here, again, has been generated through AI. This is used as an example that I want to give to emerging ethnographers about the possible ways to conduct ethnography. And so definitely don't use the content of these field notes as hard and fast insights about interaction, because these are coming from AI. But um, use this as a good template for what you might want to do as an ethnographer. So this has been DocWork. If you like this video, hit like, subscribe, all of that stuff. Let me know that we're on the right track, and hopefully I will see you again in the next video. Thank you very much.